And we're live. Hey, everybody, and welcome to this episode of Mixed Martial Analysis, where we are going to be. There's no fights coming up this weekend or anything, so we're just kind of going to be going over shit that's happened the past couple weeks, talk a little bit about Max Holloway, Brian Ortega, Valentina, and Joanna. Talk about some upcoming fights. We'll cover a broad, random, whole bunch of bullshit, right? I'm not going in any particular order, so we'll just go down through a little list I made of shit that I want to discuss. All right, so first thing on here is Valentina Shevchenko versus Joanna Jędrzejczyk from UFC 231 a couple weeks ago. And this fight kind of went how I thought it was going to go, to be honest. Valentina is just a little bit bigger. This is, by the way, one of the only two fights I got right in the fucking card. But, it's just so hard to overcome that power. Like, Joanna looked like the smaller woman in there. She's skinnier. She's leaner, right? Like, she's built for the 115-pound weight class. And Valentina's competed with Holly Holm, who has gone 5 rounds with Cyborg, right? So she's used to fighting heavier women. That one kind of went as expected, right? Not that Joanna didn't put up a great fight. Like, it was interesting. She kept things, she started picking up the volume in the later rounds, and it seemed like Valentina was slowing down a little bit, but it wasn't like she ever lost control or anything like that. So, hats off to Valentina. She's been trying to get a title for forever and finally had one booked, like I said, against Nico Montano, and then she pulled out, and then Sijara Eubanks, and fuck, man. It's about time she has a belt. She's one of the best female fighters in the entire world, so hats off to her. And then that same night, Max Holloway beat Brian Ortega in a unanimous decision to retain the 145-pound belt, and it raises the question, is Max Holloway the greatest 145-pounder of all time? And I think the answer is yes. If you look at Jose Aldo's body of work, it's extremely impressive. But if that's where you set the bar, and I said this about Conor McGregor when he beat Jose Aldo too, if Aldo is where you're setting the bar, Max Holloway didn't just clear the bar once, he cleared it twice decisively. He dominated Jose Aldo. It wasn't even, not that Aldo wasn't looking competitive early on and stuff, but Max just put a pace on that he couldn't keep up with. So I don't understand all the talk about just because Aldo accomplished great things throughout his career doesn't mean that, and Jose Aldo kind of came up in that golden age of MMA, right? When he's like a fan favorite. He's so ingrained into the sport, and Max is a pretty young guy, so I feel like people just give Aldo more credit than Holloway for that exact reason. But in my personal opinion, Holloway's the best. Look at the way and make no mistake, Brian Ortega is a fucking game competitor. He's very high level, and Jesus, man, he completely dominated him. In the third round, Brian might have won it back, but then you got the feeling when he came out in the fourth and when he looked over at Joe Rogan and was like, I'm finishing it right here, you got the feeling that he was just kind of letting Ortega empty out the gas tank. How much do you have left before I can come at you full speed and just finish this fucking thing? And that's exactly what he did. So, fuck, man, if he's not the best, it is Aldo, I think Aldo's... You got to throw Conor in the conversation too. The problem is that Conor beat him so quickly that it almost seems it wouldn't happen again if they fought. But the problem is that left hand that Conor landed that put Aldo to sleep wasn't luck. I'm kind of I don't think there's any luck. Maybe a fucking little bit, right? Sometimes maybe just people throw up Hail Marys and wild shit happens. There's a little bit of luck involved, but with shots like that, especially when he was calling it out before the fight, that's not fucking luck. That's precision and a lot of practice. And it just came to fruition that early in the fight. That's just the reality of it. You can't knock Conor for beating Jose Aldo too well. That doesn't make any fucking sense. So make no mistake, Conor McGregor is in the argument for the greatest 145-pounder of all time. Because, as Max beat Jose twice, which is why I think that kind of and he beat him. The fights were they both kind of took the same shape. So I really feel those 2 wins over Jose, and both of them so decisively, really give Max the edge over Conor. Because like I said, it wasn't luck that Conor landed it, but it does leave a little bit of doubt, what would have happened if that fight had transpired. But at the same time, I don't know. I don't know what the answer is, but in my personal opinion, it's Max. I don't know if that's right, but I think if you just look at what he does, and people just can't figure him out either. Like, obviously, people have figured out Jose now, right? Like, 2 people have done it. And it's not like Jose's that old either. I feel like he's been in the sport for so long that people kind of think he's old. And he's only 32. I mean, Max beat him when he was 31. Those are arguably years where he's maybe just coming out of his prime, So and they have a pretty similar fight record. I think Jose's like 26 or 27-4, and Max is 20-3. So, I mean, Max has a laundry list of victims at 145, like a long fucking list of them. I mean, he hasn't lost since he lost to Conor. That's the other thing too, is it's hard because when you talk about Conor McGregor and Max Holloway's last fight, I mean, it was when Max was still brand new, maybe still a white belt, he lost primarily on the ground. So I think it's a completely different fight now and a much more interesting fight. Like, if they end up booking Max Holloway versus Conor McGregor for the 145-pound bout, I won't be fucking disappointed. I don't like seeing Conor cut that much weight, but that's a fucking fantastic fight. Or fuck the belts. Max is a big boy. Just have him move up to 155 and let him fight where they're both comfortable. Like, who cares about the belt? Let's just see the fucking fight happen, right? I mean, it's the same fucking thing at the end of the day. I just want a quality fight. So, belt or no belt, it's one that I want to see. What the fuck else do I got written on here? Oh, Kevin Lee and Iaquinta fought this past weekend, and Iaquinta picked up a big unanimous decision win, and he's now got 2 wins over Kevin Lee. So those two might never. I mean, if Iaquinta can go on and win the title, that makes the argument. I mean, he's got a tall task to overcome, and there's a lot of ifs, especially with all the fucking guys swimming in the top 5 of that Shark Tank. I mean, I think he just jumped to number 4, so he's going to be fighting someone that's probably going to propel him towards the title shot next. So, I mean, we're going to find out, like, how good Iaquinta really is. But he just beat Kevin Lee. And, it puts Kevin Lee in a tough spot if Iaquinta could ever win the title, because Kevin Lee is extremely promising, but now Al has 2 wins over him, so that's hard to market. I mean, and I thought this fight brought up an interesting point, because I think you could argue, or an interesting problem rather, I think you could argue that Kevin Lee won the first 3 rounds. Maybe not. Maybe you gave a round or 2 to, I don't know. I don't know how you scored it. I think he definitely won the second. But so you get into the situation. I think that the winner of the fight was definitely Iaquinta. I think that when you consider, the fact that he was winning later in rounds, and those moments seem to be more meaningful because both guys are gassing out and they're tired. But I thought that fight, I'm glad that the decision went that way. Do I think it should have according to the current scoring system? I don't know, maybe. But the problem with the 10-9 system, right, is that if you have 2 guys and they go into the fight and they have like a razor close round, it might be like this, right? Like this guy might have just edged out the round, so he gets 10 points, and this guy gets 9, and he's like right here. Well, the problem with that scoring system is that 9 points might also be a differential like this and like this, and you might not get to here until you hit a 10-8 round. And that's a pretty fucking big gap, and there's no way that, like, if here's your bar for 10-8, there's no way that this should be a 10-9 and this should be a 10-9. It just doesn't make any sense. Fighting and the way that we judge it, and before I get into my proposed solution here, you need competent judges in place for this to work. If we don't have those, it's never going to fucking happen. And MMA is in desperate need of competent judges. I mean, the amount of things that they get wrong is, it's a problem. It needs fixed. I mean, you're talking about changing the trajectory of certain people's careers. That's not a good thing. Like, we got to fix this. But I think that what should happen is, if you think about what happens in a fight, like, both guys go in and there's a scale and it's even, and they start right fucking here. And as one guy starts to do more damage and land more shots and accumulate volume, he adds more things to his scale, right? Like, he adds more weight to it. So in this instance, like, the further down you move, the better. So you start out here, and as you do more, you add more weight. So you need a scoring system that represents this differential, right? So what I think you should do is have a decimal system, and there should be 10 or however many fucking available points you want. 10 would be easiest. But you have a 10-point system where there's 10 points allowed that can be allotted to both fighters. That's the max that can be allowed. But there's no cap on how much you can earn. You can earn the whole round. I mean, it would have to be absolutely fucking dominant, but you could have a 10-0 round. I mean, if we want to accurately reflect how fights are, like, and get an accurate, because what a round is supposed to represent is a portion of the fight. And I mean, sometimes the gaps and the gap needs to be represented more fairly. But if you had a razor thin fight, like, say the first round was really close, but you think this guy just got it, right? He'll be right here, and he'll get like maybe a 5.1 or a 5.2, and this guy will get a 4.7 or like a 4.8, whatever the difference would be, right? Because that would accurately reflect the differential and who won the fight, right? And then if you have a massive round, like if you look at, I'm trying to think of a fucking example off the top of my head, but say you get like a massively dominant round with a knockdown and, you know, he's on top of him and he's beating the fuck out of him. Like maybe your gap's like this and you're scoring at like 7-3. And does that make it harder for the fighter who lost a round to overcome that gap? Yes, absolutely. But it fucking should. Like if you like a perfect example, and I hear Joe Rogan talk about it all the time, is Yoel Romero and Robert Whittaker. When Yoel Romero was winning the rounds that he won, the gap was much fucking larger, and the 10-8 system doesn't do it justice. Like a system like the one that I just proposed, where you think about fights like a scale. And as this guy does this, the scale goes like this. And as this guy does this, it goes like this. And you have to have I think if you use decimals, that it would clean it all up and just have 10 points available, or 20, 30, but you get the fucking point. I think it would clean a lot of things up. I really do. But as mentioned, you need competent judges first. So if we can solve that, then we can move on to finding a new model for scoring fights. All right, what else do we got? Oh, Bellator just put on a big card in Hawaii where Michael Chandler was able to regain his Bellator lightweight belt from Brent Primus. And it was, I mean, you know, a pretty interesting fight. I thought it was going to be more one-sided than it was. Brent Primus put Michael Chandler in some places where, you know, he had him in some danger. He had his back at one point. He hurt him with a big shot. I mean, it was a competitive fight, but for the most part, Michael Chandler controlled it. And he controlled it from the guard and just ground and pound and outworking him and being heavier on top. I thought it was a good fight. I thought it was interesting. I thought that, like I said, Primus put up a much better fight than I thought he was going to, and it was actually extremely entertaining. I thought it was going to be like a one-sided fucking beatdown on Michael Chandler's end, just dominating the dude. But he went out there and gave it to him, man. I mean, very entertaining. Bellator's doing some big things. And I don't know if you fucking noticed. It just seems it lines up pretty conveniently, right? But Max Holloway just fought 2 weeks ago. And the very next week, Bellator has a fight in Hawaii when the Hawaiian champion, who has been proposing, you know, he wants a fight in Hawaii. Really, he's been rallying for it and like trying to get the UFC to put it in place for a long time now. So, I mean, I don't know if it was done on purpose, but it lined up pretty conveniently that your Hawaiian champion in the UFC just fought. Hawaiians love him. Then Bellator holds an event in Hawaii the very next weekend, right? It's kind of like seems like a little bit of a snub, or like kind of sending a message to the UFC, like, you won't go to Hawaii, but we definitely fucking will. And we'll do it the weekend after your boy fights. Like one of the most popular fighters on your roster, and definitely the most popular fighter in maybe the world among Hawaiians, right? Probably definitely is. So, I mean, Bellator's making moves, man. And they got a competitive roster now. I mean, that welterweight tournament that they got going on is fucking awesome. You're going to have, I think, Rory McDonald's going to fight John Fitch, and then the winner of that is going to fight, is it Gracie? I can't fucking remember. But then I think you got Paul Daly and MVP lined up in it too. I mean, they're putting on some really fucking good fights. So, I mean, and speaking of things kind of like falling through for the UFC, how about UFC 233 getting canceled? That card was lining up to be a great card. Henry Cejudo and TJ Dillashaw were going to headline it. And I originally thought, when they announced that they were going to move that fight to the ESPN Plus card, I originally thought that they had like a Tyron Woodley, Colby Covington, or Tyron Woodley, Kamaru Usman, or, you know, I don't fucking know. I thought they had a major title fight lined up to take the spot of Henry Cejudo and TJ Dillashaw. Apparently they fucking didn't, right? But then Dominick Cruz gets hurt, who is going to fight John Lineker. And what a storied career Dominick Cruz has had. I mean, that guy just can't fucking stay healthy. It's actually pretty incredible considering the amount of time that he's had off in his career, how consistently successful he's been able to remain. I mean, I think a return fight against Lineker is extremely difficult. It's tough. And I mean, John Lineker's world fucking class. But then you look back at Dominick Cruz when he returned and fought TJ Dillashaw and beat him to, regain the bantamweight title. So it's nothing new to him. Like, these layoffs aren't anything new to him. And he just says he doesn't believe in ring rust and works through it. So I don't know. He seems to be an anomaly, though. Like, most people, ring rust is a very fucking real thing. And it's evident when they're in there that they're just not moving the way that they would be if they were in, constant competition. So, fuck. What else do we got? Oh, big fight just got announced. Zabit Magomedsharipov. I hope I'm fucking pronouncing that right. Some of these names that the UFC has on, I don't even know how to pronounce fucking half the fighters' names anymore. But Zabit is going to be fighting Jeremy Stephens. And that's a really interesting fight because this is definitely going to be the most tenured opponent, the most experienced opponent, and maybe the most dangerous opponent that Zabit has ever fought. And, Zabit is obviously a promising prospect, and he's going to be fighting a fucking killer in Jeremy Stephens. I mean, he's got serious power. He was on that long win streak before he finally got stopped by Jose Aldo. So, I mean, he's no fucking joke. And this is a big test for Zabit. And probably, this probably won't earn him a title shot, but if he could get this, he's probably going to be looking at a title eliminator, right? Which makes you wonder where Brian Ortega is going to fit into that basket, because Max is maybe, I don't know if he's going to go to 145, if he's going to continue to stay at 145 or if he's going to bump up to 155. But who's left at 145 for him to really fight? I mean, Frankie Edgar, right? But it's hard to give Frankie, I know MMA math doesn't always work and add up, but it's hard to give Frankie a title fight when Ortega knocked Frankie out and then Max dominated Ortega the way that he did. I mean, you could try it, and I love Frankie Edgar. I'm a huge fucking fan. Like, I wouldn't be disappointed if they put that fight on. I think Frankie brings a different style than Brian, so it's still an interesting matchup because Frankie's like a pressure guy, right? And he's a wrestler, and he's got good, crisp boxing. So, I mean, I just don't think it's going to happen, though. I think maybe the guy in that mix that you're going to see Max fight is going to be Renato Moicano, who is, I think, underrated, very good. Maybe if the fight would have went the distance against Brian Ortega, maybe would have beat Ortega on the scorecards. I don't know. It was a close fight, but I mean, he's definitely a talent, but do I think he can beat Max? After the performance Max put on last weekend, who the fuck, I don't think anyone at 145 is going to beat him right now. I really don't. Like, it's going to take someone in a different weight class, I think, with, a more refined or like a specialized skill set that matches up poorly against him. Like, Habib Holloway is an extremely interesting fight. Now, I know we're leapfrogging like Habib and Tony Ferguson, which I want to see as well, but those guys at 145 and 155 are probably going to start floating back and forth between divisions pretty soon and fighting each other. And there's a lot of interesting matchups. The UFC needs to move to a model where they 145, 155, 165, 175. I think that's the way they have to go every 10 pounds. Like, people are always like, oh, well, then you have to keep track of more champions. Bitch, shut the fuck up. Do you know how many interim titles the UFC hands out that you have to keep track of? They were going to have Valentina Shevchenko fight Sijara Eubanks. Joe Rogan, a UFC commentator, didn't even know who the fuck she was. Like, don't get all upset about that shit. It would make for better fights, and it'd be way healthier for the fighters, and it would allow them a little more wiggle room, especially for guys who are like on the fence between 155 and 170. That's a big fucking jump. I mean, you're talking about going from fighting a guy the size of, Rafael dos Anjos look good at 170, but when he starts fighting those elite guys, they're just going to be bigger and stronger. Like, Kamaru Usman is just, when they fought, he was just so much fucking stronger than them. It's a difference maker. I mean, when you're talking about, if you had a talent like Rafael fighting in a different organization, he could probably translate weight classes extremely easily, right? Like, he could probably compete anywhere in the world and win a title other than UFC at 170 or come very close to it. But I mean, when you got guys like Tyron Woodley sitting at the top of the heap there, you got a tall fucking task in front of you. Fuck. And there's a lot, like Kevin Lee is a perfect example too. He would fit great at 165. He's a guy he's also young, so he's probably like still developing a little bit. Like he might add on some muscle mass over the years, but I mean, probably just a little bit too small for 170, but really good weight for 165 and probably just a little too big for 155, right? Like I don't understand why they decided to put a 15-pound gap in there. I mean, maybe when you were first starting up, but goddamn, I mean, it's 2018. You guys have been open for 25 years. We got to start doing something fucking different here. Like, especially with all the issues that have arisen with weight cutting. I think it's a no-brainer. But, speaking of 155 pounds, how about the Edson Barboza and Dan Hooker fight? I kind of had a feeling that Edson was going to win this one just because he's so much more experienced. This was like a big leap up in competition for Dan Hooker. Edson Barboza had his back up against the wall a little bit with his 2 losses to Kevin Lee and Habib. So I thought this was an important win for Edson to go out and pick up, and he did it dominantly, man. I mean, he put on a striking clinic, and Dan Hooker is a fucking savage. I mean, he could take a beating. There's just no quitting that fucking kid. I mean, he just kept it fucking coming. And eventually Edson just, hit him with that spinning back kick and then followed up with a left hook to the body that dropped him, and he just couldn't continue. And I mean, I don't think most men would have been able to push through what Dan Hooker was able to push through in that fight. I mean, fucking crazy. That was a pretty good free card. The Iaquinta won. What else happened on that? Oliveira extended his own submission record to 12 when he tapped out Jim Miller, which I thought that Oliveira was going to win that fight. I felt like Oliveira was a little bit smoother everywhere, but I didn't expect him to take him down and tap him out that fast. I mean, Jim Miller's a legit black belt, like no fucking joke. So for Oliveira to go out and do that really gives you an idea of how good that motherfucker is on the ground. I mean, he just latches onto you and he's just like crawling all over you and there's no fucking space for you to do anything and he's latching up your neck and fuck. Oliveira is a fucking animal. But again, do you think he can like beat Max Holloway? Probably not. I don't think he can. I mean, like I said, I think Max is sitting at the top of that division. I really want to see him branch out and start fighting guys at 155. But we'll see. I'll probably rule one of these out next week. Oh, I want to talk about one more thing before we wrap up, and that's Israel Adesanya and Anderson Silva. And I guess I don't know if it's fucking true. It's hard to tell, but I think Dana White promised Anderson Silva a title shot if he's able to overcome what I think a lot of people think is going to be a momentous or a mountainous challenge in Israel Adesanya, because he's like he's kind of like the second coming of Anderson Silva. He's like Anderson Silva 2.0, right? He's younger. He's a little bit faster. I'm sure his reactions are going to be a little bit quicker. So, I mean, but if you ask me, this move is a win-win for the UFC because Anderson Silva is probably one of the biggest names in MMA history, undoubtedly. Conor McGregor's probably number one as far as overall popularity, but Anderson Silva's definitely right up there. So you let him fight this young, up-and-coming, unique, extremely talented potential star. And, I mean, he's slowly becoming a star in Israel Adesanya. And if he's able to beat him, why the fuck shouldn't he fight for a title? I mean, I think most people are expecting him to go out there and lose. But if he can somehow pull it off, what's the big deal? Who cares if he fights for the title or not? I mean, if you like, people are raving about how good this Israel kid is. And if you can pick up a win over someone that good, fuck, who can let him fight Robert Whittaker or Kelvin Gastelum, whoever wins that matchup. You know, people aren't going to be complaining about it if he does somehow pull it off. They're going to be like, oh, fuck, Silva looked good. Do I think that's going to happen? Maybe. Probably not. I feel like Adesanya is probably going to go out there and pick up the win. And then it does a lot to not only build Adesanya's name when he's going to be competing for a title soon, but it also lets you put a fight together that's probably going to primarily take place on the feet. And I think the UFC is probably thinking like, Anderson's known for his striking and all these highlight reel knockouts, and we're going to put him up against this kid who's a striker. And if he manages to dot him up, I mean, we're going to have something to fucking promote here when this kid's going into fight for the title. Win over Anderson Silva is still no joke. He's still one of the biggest names, and like I said, in MMA history. So it's going to do a lot for Adesanya if he can go out there and pick up the win, which I expect him to. But I think it's a brilliant move on the UFC end, on the UFC's end. I don't have a problem with the fight at all. I think it's a fan-friendly fight. And like I said, if Silva can somehow pull off that challenge and like overcome it, why shouldn't he be able to fight for the title? He's fighting a guy who's surging. And like who I said, a lot of people at 185 are going to have a fucking hard time dealing with the style of Israel. I mean, fuck. That's going to be a great fight. I'm excited for that one. I think it's, like I said, it'll be a fan-friendly fight. It's going to probably remain primarily on the feet, and you're going to get to see a legend and one of the best strikers of all time fight this surging prospect who people can't stop raving about how good of a kickboxer it is, right? So very interesting fight. I'm probably going to rule one of these out next week for the UFC 232 because John Jones is fighting Gustafsson, Cyborg, Amanda Nunes, Carlos Condit, Chiesa. Corey Anderson is fighting Alir Latifi, which is a really interesting fight because of Anderson's wrestling background, and Latifi is obviously an extremely strong wrestler. So good fight at 205. And then you got Chad Mendez fighting Alexander Volkanovski, and that's a great fucking fight. So stat card coming up next week. I'll put out my predictions and everything for it then. Check us out on Instagram, Mixed Martial Analysis. Same thing on Facebook, but I think I'm on Twitter too, but I don't really. My favorite one's Instagram. I think it's the easiest to use, so I'm almost always on there. Go ahead and subscribe if you guys liked it, and like I said, I'll probably be rolling one of these out maybe next like Wednesday to break down the fights for UFC 232. Thank you guys for tuning in, and I will catch you guys later. Bye.